The sun burned fiercely over the dry land of Avenes. The air shimmered with heat, and the wind carried the taste of dust and despair. Once, long ago, rivers had flowed here. The land had been green, filled with life and laughter. But now it was only endless sand and cracked ground that split open like old scars. The sky was pale and empty, offering no promise of rain. In the middle of that dying desert stood a small camp of the Dravari. They were dragon-like creatures with scales that once shone in bright colors, but now those scales were dull and dry. Their wings hung tired at their sides, and their golden eyes were dim with hunger and thirst. Every day they searched for water, but there was none left. Every night they looked to the stars, hoping for mercy that never came. A young Dravari child named Kiro lay on the warm sand, his body weak and trembling. His tongue was dry, and his breathing was slow. His scales had lost their shine, turning pale and cracked. His small claws twitched as he whispered for water. The sound of his voice was so faint that it almost vanished in the wind. Beside him sat his sister, Lyra. She was older, her wings broader, her eyes sharp but filled with pain. She held his hand gently, as if afraid he might break. Her heart ached as she watched him suffer. She had given him all the drops of water she had saved for herself. Now she had none left. She looked at the empty container beside her. A simple metal cup that once carried the most precious thing in the universe, life. Around them, the rest of the tribe sat in silence. No one spoke anymore. They had run out of words just as they had run out of water. The elder of the tribe, a tall Dravari with silver scales named Orin, stood near a broken stone pillar and looked at the horizon. His eyes were clouded with sorrow. He had seen many seasons pass, but never one as cruel as this. Lyra turned her gaze to the distance, where the desert stretched endlessly toward the sky. Somewhere beyond that horizon, she knew, was the human outpost, Horizon 9. The humans had come years ago, building metal shelters and machines that dug into the ground. They had water. They guarded it like treasure, trading it only for rare materials or labor. The Dravari had nothing left to give. A soft cough escaped Kiro's throat, pulling Lyra back to him. His eyes opened slowly. They were glazed and tired, but when they met hers, they still held trust. She tried to smile, though her lips trembled. "Rest, Kiro," she whispered. "You will be better soon." He shook his head weakly. "I'm thirsty, sister." His voice broke like dry glass. Lyra closed her eyes, and tears slipped down her cheeks. They rolled over her dry skin and fell onto his hand. He watched them with faint curiosity. For a moment, he smiled. Those tears were the only water left in their world. The wind grew stronger, carrying sand that bit against their scales. The sky darkened with dust. The Dravari pulled their cloaks tight, hiding from the storm. Lyra held Kiro close, shielding him with her wings. Her heart pounded as she listened to his weak breaths. She whispered a soft song their mother had once sung, a lullaby about rivers and rain. Her voice cracked, but she kept singing. When the storm passed, everything was quiet again. The sun returned, hotter than before. The ground glowed with heat. Kiro slept, but his chest rose and fell slowly, as if each breath was a battle. Lyra stood up and looked at the horizon once more. The thought came to her like a spark in the darkness. The humans had water. If she could reach them, maybe she could save him. But the journey was dangerous. The desert was wide and filled with hidden pits where sand swallowed travelers whole. And the humans did not welcome the Dravari easily. Many who tried to trade or plead for help never returned. Yet, Lyra felt a strength inside her she had never known. She could not sit and watch her brother fade away. She would rather die trying to save him. She walked to Orin and bowed her head. The old Dravari looked at her with tired eyes. "You wish to go to the humans," he said softly. It was not a question. "Yes," she answered. "For one bottle of water. That is all I need." Orin closed his eyes. "They will take more than they give. They will not see your heart, only your scales." "Then let them take them," Lyra said quietly. "Kiro will live." The elder sighed. "You are brave, child. But bravery is often the same as sorrow." He placed his hand on her shoulder. Go if you must. The stars watch you. Lyra nodded. She returned to Kiro's side and knelt. He was still asleep. She touched his face gently. I will bring you water, she whispered. Wait for me. Then she rose and began to pack. She took a torn piece of cloth to cover her head, a small cracked vial to hold the water, and a shard of metal to mark her path in the sand. As she stepped away from the camp, the tribe watched in silence. No one tried to stop her. They knew that hope was rare, and sometimes it came dressed in foolishness. The wind blew softly as she walked into the desert. Her shadow stretched long behind her, fading into the dunes. The sun glared down, merciless and bright. Each step burned, but she did not stop. Somewhere far ahead lay Horizon 9, the place of humans and water. Somewhere behind her, her brother waited. And as she walked, she whispered to herself again and again, like a prayer. Just one bottle of water. The sun was setting when the metal towers of Horizon 9 came into view. The human outpost stood like a scar against the desert, tall and hard-edged, surrounded by fences of steel and sensors that blinked in the fading light. Beyond its walls were tanks filled with clear, shining water, a treasure greater than gold on Aveni's. Pipes ran from the ground into storage silos, humming softly with the sound of life. To the humans, this was a station of survival. To the Dravari, it was a fortress of denial. Commander Ethan Cole stood on the main watch platform, his hands resting on the railing. He was a tall man with sun-worn skin and gray eyes that missed nothing. Around him, the base buzzed with the evening shift change. Soldiers checked the perimeter, drones hovered over the dunes, and technicians reported data from the water purifiers. The heat still hung in the air, even as the light dimmed. Cole took a sip from his metal flask, the cold water sliding down his throat, and for a moment he felt guilty, though he quickly pushed that thought aside. Below the platform, Sergeant Lucas Hart was inspecting the new delivery drones. His uniform was dusty, and his face showed the marks of long hours under the sun. He wiped his brow and looked out at the horizon. The desert stretched endlessly, orange and gold under the dying light. It looked peaceful, but he knew better. He had seen storms rise from that emptiness and tear through the land. He had seen the Dravari too, tall, winged, desperate. Once they had approached the base begging for trade, but the rules were clear. No water without exchange. Inside the main command room, Technician Claire Mason adjusted the oxygen filters and glanced at the water gauge. The levels were stable. She sighed in relief but couldn't shake the unease that had been growing for months. The humans had been told that rationing was for safety, but she could not ignore the fact that the Dravari were dying out there. Sometimes, at night, she could hear distant cries carried by the wind. They did not sound like animals. They sounded like people. Commander Cole entered the room and checked the data logs. Purifiers running at 79%. Any sign of storm activity tonight? He asked. Claire shook her head. Nothing yet, sir. Winds are steady. Temperature expected to drop by 2 degrees after sunset. Cole nodded. Good. Make sure the night patrols are alert. Last week, one of the scavenger groups tried to cut through the southern fence. Hart entered a moment later, carrying his helmet under one arm. Perimeter checks complete. No movement beyond 2 clicks, sir. But I did find tracks. Dravari-sized. Fresh. Cole frowned. How close? About a mile out. Looks like one traveler, heading west. Cole looked out the observation window. The desert was quiet now, painted in soft colors by the setting sun. They never stop trying, he murmured. Hart sighed. Can you blame them? We sit on lakes of water while they die of thirst. Cole turned to him. This isn't about mercy, Sergeant. It's about control. We have limited supplies and orders to maintain balance. If we start giving water away, we lose that balance. Hart didn't answer. He looked away, jaw tight. He had heard the same argument too many times. He didn't like it, but he had no power to change it. Outside the walls, the desert wind began to rise again. The sensors picked up a faint signal, a heat source moving slowly toward Horizon 9. The operator at the console reported it to Cole. Unidentified figure approaching from the east, sir. Size consistent with Dravari adult. Non-hostile movement pattern. Cole narrowed his eyes. Keep watch. Don't engage unless they cross the line. Night fell fully now, covering the world in deep shadows. The lights of Horizon 9 shone brightly, forming a halo of safety in the darkness. The base was quiet except for the hum of machines. Cole walked through the metal corridors, listening to the distant sounds of generators and filtered air. His boots echoed softly against the floor. He passed the mess hall, where a few soldiers laughed over their meals, and the research bay, where samples from Aveni's were stored in glass containers. Water condensed on the inside of one tube, forming droplets that rolled down slowly. He stopped for a moment watching them fall. So simple, he thought, so powerful. In her quarters, Claire sat by the window and looked out at the dark desert. She thought about the Dravari again. She had seen one up close once. A creature with eyes full of sadness and pride. They weren't monsters. They were just different. She wondered if anyone else on the base still saw them that way. At the same time, Sergeant Hart stood at the southern gate, holding his rifle loosely. He stared out into the distance, where the scanners had detected movement. The wind carried faint sounds, steps on sand, slow but steady. He felt a strange chill. Whoever was out there was walking alone, unarmed, and heading straight for Horizon 9. He whispered to himself, almost in disbelief. What could drive anyone across this desert? Far beyond the fence, a lone figure moved through the dark, a shadow among shadows. Lyra's steps were weak, but her resolve burned bright. Her eyes fixed on the lights ahead. Each one of those lights meant life. She would reach them no matter what it cost. The humans had water. She only needed one bottle. Just one bottle to save her brother. The night on Aveni's was cold and still. The desert that burned during the day now shivered under a blanket of silver light. Stars shone brightly above, and the wind whispered softly across the dunes. In the small Dravari camp, everyone slept restlessly. Hunger and thirst had made dreams uneasy things. Lyra sat beside her brother Kiro, who lay wrapped in a thin cloth. His breathing was weak and shallow. Every few moments, his chest rose with effort, and then fell again, as if the air itself refused to stay inside him. His lips were dry, his scales had lost their color, and his once bright eyes were closed. Lyra placed her hand on his chest and listened to the faint heartbeat beneath. It was there but fading. She looked toward the horizon. In the distance, faint human lights flickered, glowing against the darkness. Horizon 9 was close enough to see at night if the air was clear. Those lights looked like stars fallen to the ground. They promised hope, but they also brought fear. The humans guarded their water with machines, guns, and rules. They had come to Aveni's to take from the planet, not to share it. Lyra thought about what the Elder Orin had said before she left him earlier that day. His words still echoed in her mind. They will not see your heart, only your scales. He had lived through the first contact with humans. He had seen how trade turned into control, and how control turned into silence. But Lyra did not have the choice to care about history. All that mattered now was Kiro. She looked at him again. He was smaller than she remembered, like he had shrunk from the heat and hunger. She brushed his face gently. "You have to live," she whispered. "You are all I have left." Her parents were gone, taken by the drought 2 seasons ago. Her tribe had grown smaller each passing month. There was no more food, no more water. They could not dig deep enough to reach what once flowed freely beneath them. Even the sky had forgotten them. The clouds never came anymore. Lyra stood up and looked around the camp. The fires had burned out, and the cold sand glowed faintly under the moonlight. The shapes of the sleeping Dravari lay still, wings folded like broken sails. She walked quietly to the edge of the camp and stared out at the desert. She knew what she had to do. There had been stories, whispered among her people, that the humans sometimes accepted trades. They took Dravari stones or metals in exchange for water, but those were gone now. Recently, the stories had become darker, humans taking Dravari as subjects for study in return for supplies. No one knew what happened to those who went into the human posts, but they never came back. Some said the humans kept them locked away. Some said they died. No one knew the truth. Lyra closed her eyes. The thought of it made her chest tighten, but she pushed the fear down. If she did not go, Kiro would die. If she went, maybe he would live. That was enough. She returned to her brother's side. He stirred slightly as she knelt. His eyes opened halfway, cloudy and weak. "Lyra," he whispered. She smiled, though her heart broke. "I'm here." He swallowed, his voice barely a breath. "Is it morning?" "Not yet," she said softly. "The stars are still awake." He closed his eyes again. "I dreamed of the river," he murmured. "The one near home." Lyra's throat tightened. "Yes, I remember it." She brushed her hand over his scales. "You'll see it again. I promise." He didn't answer. His breathing grew slower. Lyra stayed with him until he fell into a deep, silent sleep. Then she stood, her decision made. She went to her small shelter and gathered what little she had left. A torn piece of cloth to cover her head, a cracked vial to hold the water, and a metal shard to use as a marker in the sand. She tied them together with a thin rope. Her claws trembled as she fastened the knot. Once, she might have prayed to the stars for strength, but even the stars felt too far away now. Before she left, she knelt beside Kiro one last time. She pressed her forehead against his. "I will bring you water," she whispered. "No matter what they ask, no matter what I must give, you will live." Then she rose and walked toward the horizon. Her shadow stretched long behind her in the pale light. The sand crunched softly beneath her feet. Each step took her farther from her home, from her tribe, from the safety of what little she knew. Ahead, the wind carried the faint hum of machines, the sound of Horizon 9. As she walked, she whispered to herself, as if the words alone could keep her strong. Just one bottle for Kiro. The night grew colder. The stars faded slowly as dawn began to creep across the desert. Lyra did not stop. Her wings ached, her legs trembled, but she kept moving. Hope, as thin as a thread, pulled her forward. When the first rays of sunlight touched the sands, the lights of Horizon 9 gleamed brighter. Lyra looked up and took a deep breath. Her journey had begun, and there was no turning back now. The morning sun rose over Aveni's like a great fire. The first light spread across the endless dunes, painting the desert in shades of gold and red. The heat returned quickly, and the coolness of night vanished as if it had never been. The wind blew softly, carrying the dry scent of sand and stone. Lyra walked alone through that vast emptiness. Each step sank slightly into the hot sand, and each breath felt heavier than the last. She had left her camp hours ago, but it already felt like a memory. The world behind her was silent. The only sound was the soft crunch of her claws and the beating of her tired heart. She had covered her head with a torn piece of cloth, but the sun still burned through it. Her scales glowed faintly under the light, cracked and dull from dryness. Her wings dragged slightly behind her, too weak to lift in the thin air. Still, she kept moving. In her hand she carried the small cracked vial. She looked at it often, as if by watching it she could make it fill with water. The desert stretched on without end. There were no trees, no shadows, no life. Only wind and sand and the far line of the horizon where the sky met the ground. Every few minutes, Lyra looked up, searching for the faint shapes of Horizon 9's towers. Sometimes she thought she saw them, but when she blinked, they were gone again, hidden by heat and distance. As the day grew hotter, Lyra stopped beside a rock outcrop. It offered a thin strip of shade, just enough for her to rest. She knelt there, panting softly, and took a deep breath. The air was dry and harsh, scratching her throat. She licked her lips and felt the roughness of her own tongue. She had not had a single drop of water since leaving the camp. Her body trembled, but her spirit held firm. She closed her eyes and thought of Kiro. She saw his face, small and tired, whispering for water. She remembered the way his eyes looked at her with trust. That image pushed her back to her feet. She could not stop now. Every second wasted was another moment her brother grew weaker. Lyra began walking again, her pace slow but steady. The sand burned her feet, but she ignored the pain. The world shimmered ahead, the air twisting in the heat. In the distance, she thought she saw shapes moving, dark forms sliding across the dunes. For a moment her heart raced. Were they humans? Machines? Or shadows from the heat? She squinted, but the shapes faded away. The desert was full of tricks. Sometimes it showed rivers that were not there, trees that vanished when you came close. Hope and illusion lived side by side in this place. By noon, the sun was a white circle of fire above her. Her wings ached, her legs shook, and her vision blurred. She stumbled more than once, catching herself on her hands. The sand burned her palms, but she did not stop. When she finally fell to her knees, she pressed her claws into the sand and whispered, just one bottle for Kiro." The words gave her strength again. A small sound reached her ears. A low hum, distant but real. She looked up. Far away, a human drone floated across the horizon, moving in a slow patrol path. It was small, silver, and silent except for its faint mechanical buzz. Lyra watched it with wide eyes. It was proof that the humans were close. Horizon 9 could not be far now. She hid behind a dune, watching the drone pass. It did not see her. When it was gone, she rose again and began walking in that direction. Her heart beat faster now, not with fear, but with fragile hope. The afternoon dragged on. The air grew so hot that the sand shimmered like liquid. Lyra's throat felt like stone. She could barely swallow. Her wings were cracked and bleeding in small places, but she ignored the pain. The thought of her brother's face kept her moving. As the sun began to fall again, the light turned red and deep orange. The long shadows of the dunes stretched like rivers of darkness. Lyra climbed one last hill and froze. There, far ahead, she saw it, the metal towers of Horizon 9. They gleamed faintly under the dying sun, tall and sharp against the sky. The sight filled her with both hope and dread. For a long time she stood there, staring. Her breath came in quick, uneven gasps. The place looked so close, yet she knew it was still miles away. Between her and the outpost lay open ground, with no cover. She would have to walk right into the light of human eyes. The wind picked up again, cold and sharp. She wrapped her cloth tighter around her head and began walking once more. Her legs shook, but she refused to fall. The stars began to appear as night returned to Aveni's. Each one seemed to watch her from the sky, silent and distant. By the time darkness fully covered the desert, Lyra was close enough to see the faint blue glow of Horizon 9's outer lights. She could hear the hum of machines now, deep and steady, like a heartbeat. Her steps slowed. Her body screamed for rest, but her will carried her forward. When she reached the edge of the human perimeter, she stopped. The fences stood tall before her, shining faintly in the moonlight. Beyond them, she could see movement. Figures of humans walking, lights flickering, metal doors opening and closing. The smell of oil and machinery filled the air. And somewhere deep inside the outpost, she knew there was water. Lyra stood there for a long moment, breathing hard. She looked at the cracked vial in her hand. The moonlight reflected off it, faint and cold. Then she took a deep breath and whispered to herself, "For you, Kiro." And with that, she stepped forward, crossing the last dune that separated her from the humans. The night was quiet around Horizon 9. The outpost's walls glowed with pale blue lights that pulsed softly, keeping watch over the empty desert. The wind carried fine dust against the metal fences, whispering like a voice from another world. Inside, most of the humans were finishing their shifts. The machines hummed steadily, and the generators kept the air cool. To the people within, it was another calm night on Aveni's. To Lyra, it was the edge of everything she knew. She stood just beyond the perimeter fence, her body trembling from exhaustion. Her wings hung heavy, covered in dust, and her throat ached from dryness. The cracked vial was still clutched tightly in her clawed hand. The glowing lights of Horizon 9 hurt her eyes after the darkness of the desert. She had made it. The humans were right there. Water was right there. But now came the hardest part. A sudden voice cut through the silence. Movement at the east fence. Searchlights swept across the sand. Lyra froze as beams of white light crossed over her, lighting her scales like glass. Alarms did not sound, but a metallic voice called again from the watchtower. Unidentified life form detected. Maintain position. Lyra raised her arms slowly, showing she carried no weapon. Her knees trembled, but she didn't move. A moment later, the outer gate hissed open. A group of human soldiers stepped out, their rifles raised but not firing. At the front was Sergeant Lucas Hart, his face hidden behind a dusty helmet visor. "Hold your ground," Hart ordered. The others spread out behind him, cautious. They had seen Dravari before, but never one alone, and never one who came unarmed. Lyra tried to speak, but her throat made only a rasping sound. Hart lowered his weapon slightly, noticing her condition. He took a slow step forward. "You're far from your territory," he said. "What do you want?" Lyra lifted the cracked vial weakly. Her voice came out dry and broken. "Water, 1 bottle, please." The words struck the soldiers silent. They glanced at one another, unsure. Hart looked at her more closely. Her scales were dull, cracked by heat. Her eyes, bright gold beneath the dust, held no anger, only desperation. He lowered his weapon completely. "She's just a kid," one of the younger soldiers muttered. "She's dying." "Orders say no trade without approval," another said quietly. Hart's jaw tightened. He knew the rule. No water for unregistered aliens. Everything had to go through command. But something about the Dravari girl's voice, the way she said "please," made him pause. He pressed a button on his wrist. "Calm. Commander Cole, you'd better come down here." A few minutes later, the main gate opened again. Commander Ethan Cole stepped out with 2 guards beside him. He stopped when he saw Lyra. "Is this what you called me for, Sergeant?" he asked sharply. Hart nodded. "She came alone. Says she wants water." Cole's eyes studied Lyra. He had seen Dravari from a distance during patrol flights, but never this close. Her form was both alien and familiar, a mix of strength and sorrow. "She speaks our language," he said slowly. "Who taught you that?" Lyra's voice trembled. "My mother. Before she died." She swallowed hard. "Please, just 1 bottle. My brother, he will die without it." There was a long silence. The wind moved between them, carrying the sound of the desert. Cole looked at Hart, then back at Lyra. "You understand we don't give water freely. What do you offer in return?" Lyra hesitated. Her claws trembled around the vial. "I have nothing," she said softly. Then, after a moment, she looked up, her voice almost a whisper. "Take me. I will trade myself for it." The humans stood frozen. One of the soldiers cursed under his breath. Hart turned his eyes away. Even Cole looked uneasy. "You don't know what you're saying," he said. "I do," Lyra replied. 1 bottle. That is all I ask." Cole was silent for a long time. Finally, he sighed. "Bring her inside, slowly, and make sure she's not harmed." Hart nodded and stepped forward. He offered his hand, but Lyra did not take it. She followed quietly, too weak to argue. As they entered the gate, the metal doors closed behind them with a deep hiss. The noise echoed through the night like the sound of finality. Inside, the outpost lights were bright and cold. Machines lined the halls, their surfaces shining silver. Humans walked past, staring at Lyra with wide eyes. Some whispered, others looked away. To them, she was both a wonder and a warning. Hart led her through the corridors to the command center. "Careful," he said softly. "Don't speak unless the commander asks." Lyra nodded faintly, her vision blurred. Every light felt too bright, every sound too sharp. When they reached the end of the hallway, Cole turned and faced her again. "We'll decide what to do with you," he said. "But you'll get your water." He motioned to Claire Mason, the technician standing nearby. "Prepare a sample for her," he said. Claire hesitated, glancing at Lyra. She saw the cracked vial in the alien girl's hand and felt something twist inside her chest. She filled the vial from the purifier tank, her movements slow and careful. The sound of the water filling the vial echoed softly through the room. When Lyra took it, she held it close, staring at the clear liquid as if it were light itself. She whispered something in her own tongue, a prayer or a thank you, then turned her eyes back to Cole. "Now," she said quietly, "I belong to you." Cole didn't answer. For the first time in months, he didn't feel like a commander. He felt like a thief. The night passed slowly inside Horizon 9. The humans went back to their duties, but whispers about the Dravari girl spread like quiet fire. Some said she was a spy, others said she was just desperate. No one could agree, but everyone remembered the way she had offered herself for a single bottle of water. Commander Ethan Cole sat alone in his quarters, staring at the half-empty glass of purified water on his desk. The image of Lyra's eyes haunted him, the way they had glowed with both fear and hope. He had seen many alien faces, but never one that looked so human in its sadness. He rubbed his temple and sighed. "What have I done?" he whispered. Down in the holding wing, Lyra sat quietly on a metal bench. Her wings were folded tight against her back, and her hands rested in her lap. The humans had not chained her, but they had locked the door. A camera blinked red above her head. She did not care. All she could think about was her brother. The small vial of water rested beside her, its surface shining under the cold light. He would live now, she told herself. He had to. Sergeant Lucas Hart came by in the morning with food and a small bottle of water. "Here," he said softly, placing the tray through the hatch. Lyra looked up, surprised. "You should eat." She studied him for a moment before nodding. "Thank you," she said. Her voice was still weak, but clearer than before. "You are kind." Hart gave a small smile. "Kind doesn't always mean smart," he said. "Command's not happy about this. They think you're trouble." "I am not trouble," Lyra replied. "I only needed water." Hart sighed. "That's not how it works here. Nothing is ever just water." Later that day, Cole came down himself. The soldiers stood aside as he entered the cell. Lyra rose slowly, standing tall despite her exhaustion. "You kept your word," she said. "My brother will live." Cole nodded. "And you understand what you agreed to?" "Yes," she said simply. "I am yours." Cole frowned. "That's not what I want." He looked around the small cell, then met her eyes again. "You don't belong in a cage." "But the rules." "Rules are made by those who do not thirst," she interrupted softly. "You have water. You do not understand." The words stung him more than he expected. He stood silently for a moment before turning away. "I'll speak with Central Command," he said. "Maybe we can send you home." Lyra's voice stopped him. "Home is dying," she said. "The sands have no water. The sun has no mercy. There is no home." Cole looked back at her, unsure what to say. Her words carried the weight of truth. He saw then that she wasn't just one girl. She was a symbol of everything their presence had taken from the planet. "Then what do you want?" he asked quietly. Lyra lowered her gaze. "Nothing. My brother lives. That is enough." Cole left the cell in silence. But as he walked through the corridors, he felt the unease grow heavier inside him. He had followed orders all his life, but now, for the first time, he began to wonder if following them made him right. That evening, as the sun set over the metal walls, the desert glowed red and gold. On the horizon, something shimmered, movement, faint and fast. Hart noticed it first from the watchtower. "Commander," he said into the calm, "you might want to see this." Cole climbed the stairs to the tower and lifted the binoculars. What he saw made him tense. A small figure was moving across the dunes. A Dravari child, crawling, weak but alive. He was heading toward the outpost. Cole's heart sank. "That must be her brother," he said. Hart nodded. "Looks like he's barely standing." "Open the gate," Cole ordered. "Get him inside." Within minutes, the soldiers rushed out and carried the boy in. His scales were cracked and dull like Lyra's had been. He was barely breathing. When Lyra saw him, she ran to the cell door and cried out, "Aaron!" The guards opened the door. Lyra knelt beside her brother, tears falling freely now. "You are safe," she whispered. "You are safe." Cole stood nearby, watching. He could not find words. The boy was too weak to speak but managed a faint smile when he saw her face. Claire Mason, the technician, brought more water. "We'll help him," she said gently. "He'll be okay." Lyra looked up at her, eyes bright with gratitude. "You are good," she said softly. Claire smiled faintly. "We just have more to give," she said. "That's all." As night fell again over Horizon 9, Cole returned to his office. He looked out at the desert, where the dying sands stretched forever. He realized that something had changed, not just in Lyra or her brother, but in the hearts of the humans who had seen her courage. The bargain she made was not only for water. It had bought something greater, an understanding they had never known. And somewhere in that vast, silent world, a new question began to grow in the commander's mind. If water was life, what did it mean to hoard it while others died of thirst? Days passed inside Horizon 9, and something began to change. The soldiers and workers who once spoke of aliens with fear or disgust now looked at Lyra and her brother with quiet curiosity. They saw that she did not attack, did not steal, did not hate them. She only cared for her brother and thanked anyone who offered help. Her gentleness made the humans uneasy. It made them question things they had never thought about before. Commander Ethan Cole felt it too. Every time he walked past the holding room and saw Lyra sitting beside her sleeping brother, something in him stirred. A small voice that asked, "What if we are the invaders? Not them?" But he pushed it away, reminding himself of the laws and the orders that came from Earth. Sergeant Lucas Hart, however, was not as good at pushing it away. He had begun sneaking extra food and clean blankets to the siblings. When Claire Mason noticed, she said nothing. She even left water purifiers unlocked near the lab. "If Command finds out, we'll be in trouble," Hart said one night, looking over his shoulder. Claire shrugged. "Maybe trouble is what this place needs." Meanwhile, the rest of the crew started to whisper. "The commander's gone soft," some said. "He's letting that alien stay too long." Others argued quietly. "Maybe she's right. Maybe we shouldn't be hoarding water." The camp was splitting in two, those who followed the orders from Earth and those who followed what they felt was right. Lyra noticed it. She could hear the tension in the way the humans spoke, in the way they walked. She understood conflict well. Her own people had destroyed themselves with it. So she stayed quiet, never asking for more, never causing trouble. But one night, as she sat beside her brother's bed, she said softly, "They fight because of us." Aaron, still weak but awake now, looked at her. "You did not want this," he whispered. "No," she said. "I wanted peace, just water. But sometimes, peace comes only after hearts are broken." In the command center, Cole received a transmission from Central Command on Earth. The message was cold and short. "Return the alien specimens for study or dispose of them. Resources are not to be shared beyond protocol." He read it twice, his jaw tightening. The thought of handing Lyra and her brother over for study made his stomach turn. He called Hart and Claire into his office. "They want me to send them to Earth," he said quietly. "Or worse." Hart's eyes darkened. "That's not right." "I know," Cole said. "But disobeying command is treason." Claire looked between them. "Then maybe it's time someone committed treason." The words hung heavy in the air. Cole looked out the window toward the endless desert. The same thought had already crossed his mind. "If we defy Earth," he said slowly, "we'll lose everything. Our ranks, our lives." Hart crossed his arms. "Maybe that's the price of doing what's right." That night, Cole couldn't sleep. He walked the corridors, listening to the hum of the machines and the faint wind outside. Every sound reminded him of Aveni's, its dying lands, its thirst. And now, the people inside Horizon 9 were the only ones who could decide what kind of humans they wanted to be. By dawn, the decision was made. When the morning alarms rang, the crew gathered in the mess hall. Cole stood before them, his expression steady but grave. "Command has issued new orders," he said. "They want us to surrender the Dravari children for study." Murmurs filled the room. Some faces turned angry, others fearful. Cole took a breath. "I will not do it." The room went silent. Every eye turned to him. "We came here to explore, not to destroy," he continued. "If we start treating life as something to trade or to test, then we've already lost what makes us human." Hart stood beside him. "I'm with the commander," he said. "Anyone else who feels the same, stay. The rest can report to the shuttle bay." The room was still for a long moment. Then Claire stepped forward. Then another soldier. Then another. Almost half the room stayed where they were. The others left without a word. Lyra watched from the hallway, her golden eyes wide. She didn't understand everything they said, but she could feel the change in the air. A shift from fear to courage. Cole looked at her. "We'll protect you," he said simply. "Both of you." Lyra bowed her head. "Then I will protect you too." Outside, the desert wind howled like a warning. Above them, the stars glimmered cold and distant. And inside Horizon 9, a quiet rebellion had begun. Not with guns or threats, but with the simple choice to do what was right. The days after the rebellion were quiet but heavy. Everyone at Horizon 9 knew that Earth Command would not ignore what had happened. The outpost had gone silent to all transmissions, and the humans inside were living with the tension of waiting. They knew punishment was coming, but they did not know when. Cole kept the base running, checking supplies and water systems, while Hart and the others fortified the perimeter. Lyra and Aaron stayed in a small room near the infirmary, where Claire looked after them. The boy's strength was returning, though he still spoke little. Lyra tried to help where she could, carrying small tools, sorting cables, or bringing water to the humans who had chosen to stay. It was strange to her, how they had gone from guards to companions. But far above Avinis, the first sign of change appeared. A fleet of dark ships broke through the sky. The Earth insignia was painted on their sides, bright white against metal gray. They were not coming to talk. "Command ships inbound," shouted one of the radar techs. 6 of them, no response to our calls. Cole's heart sank. "They're coming for us." The outpost came alive with alarm sirens. The soldiers ran to stations, power shields flickered on, and gun turrets turned toward the sky. Hart stood beside Cole on the main deck, watching the horizon darken with dust and smoke. "They'll bomb us first," Hart said. "They won't risk boarding." "Maybe," Cole replied, "but we'll make them see we're not enemies." "Not sure they'll listen." Lyra appeared at the entrance to the deck, her wings half open. "They are your people?" she asked. Cole nodded. "Yes, and they think we've betrayed them." Lyra looked up at the dark shapes growing in the clouds. "Then they will not stop until they destroy you, or until we make them understand," he said. The first explosion came moments later. A missile struck the outer wall, shaking the ground. Metal screamed and lights flickered. Dust filled the air as alarms blared. Claire rushed into the deck, shouting over the noise. "Power's dropping. The shields won't hold another hit." Cole grabbed the comm, "All units, hold fire unless I give the order. We're not fighting them unless we must." Hart frowned. "Sir, they'll wipe us out. Then we die human," Cole said firmly. Lyra stepped forward. "Let me go," she said suddenly. "They will see me, and maybe they will stop." Cole shook his head. "No, they'll kill you." "They will kill you anyway," Lyra replied. "But if they see what I am, maybe they will remember what mercy looks like." The next blast tore open the east wall. Fire streaked across the courtyard. Hart grabbed a rifle, but Cole stopped him. "Cover me," he said. Then he turned to Lyra. "If you go, I go with you." The two stepped out onto the open sand as the sky above burned with fire and smoke. The command ships hovered low, engines roaring. Lyra lifted her hands, her wings spreading wide, glowing faintly under the light. She looked like a living flame against the darkness. Cole raised his voice through the comms, broadcasting to the fleet. "This is Commander Ethan Cole of Horizon 9. Cease fire. You are targeting civilians, non-hostile lifeforms under my protection." There was only static at first. Then a cold voice replied, "You have defied Earth Command, Commander. Stand down and surrender the alien creatures." Cole looked at Lyra. "They're not creatures," he said into the comm, "they're people. And we're done being the monsters." For a brief moment, everything was still. The smoke drifted slowly. The sound of engines filled the air. Then one of the ships lowered a ramp. A squad of armored troops stepped out, rifles ready. But they didn't fire. From the lead ship, a woman in an officer's uniform walked forward. Her voice was calm but cold. "Commander Cole, you've broken protocol." "I followed conscience," he said. She looked past him to Lyra, who stood motionless. "You traded water for her life?" Cole nodded. "And I'd do it again." The officer studied Lyra for a long time. The girl stood tall, her golden eyes steady despite the smoke and dust. Finally, the officer lowered her weapon. "You've caused a mess, Commander," she said quietly. "But maybe Earth needs to see this." Cole blinked in surprise. "You're not taking them?" "No," she said. "Not today." She turned to her troops. "Stand down." The soldiers hesitated, then obeyed. The tension in the air broke like a wave. Hart let out a shaky breath. Claire clutched Aaron's hand, tears in her eyes. The wind swept through the broken outpost, carrying the smell of smoke and dust, but also something new, hope. As the ships lifted back into the sky, Cole turned to Lyra. "You saved us," he said softly. Lyra shook her head. "No, you saved yourselves. You remembered who you are." The fire died slowly across the sands of Avinis. The outpost was broken but alive. And for the first time, humans and Dravari stood side by side beneath the same stars, no longer as enemies, but as something closer to equals. The days after the attack were filled with silence. The sky above Horizon 9 was clear again, and the scent of smoke had faded into the dry wind. The outpost stood half-broken but still alive. Humans and Dravari worked side by side to repair the damage. For the first time, there were no walls between them. Lyra helped carry parts to the engineers while Aaron followed Claire around the water purification room, curious about every pipe and light. The humans were patient with him. He smiled often now, though he still spoke softly. His laughter echoed through the hallways like sunlight breaking through clouds. Commander Cole stood outside the main gate, watching the dunes stretch endlessly toward the horizon. The planet was still dying. Every gust of wind carried dust and heat. But somewhere beneath the sands, he knew, water still existed, buried deep, hidden from both man and alien. Hart joined him, wiping his hands on a rag. "Repairs are halfway done," he said. "We'll need more power cells if we want to rebuild the shield grid." Cole nodded. "We'll manage. Earth Command won't send supplies, but maybe we don't need them anymore." Hart gave a small laugh. "You think they'll just forget about us?" "Maybe," Cole said. "Or maybe they'll watch. Maybe they'll learn something." Behind them, Lyra approached quietly. She carried a small metal case, the one Claire had used to test water samples. "Commander," she said, "I want to show you something." Cole followed her to the edge of the desert. She knelt on the cracked ground and opened the case. Inside was a glass vial filled with water that shimmered faintly blue. "This is from below," she said. "The old river still breathes. It sleeps, but it is not dead." Cole crouched beside her. "You found water?" She nodded. "Not much, but enough to show that life can return if we care for it." Claire arrived, her eyes wide. "If there's water under the surface, we can build collectors," she said quickly. "We can restore the land." Hart joined them, staring at the glowing vial. "Looks like we just got a reason to stay." Cole smiled faintly. "Not to stay," he said. "To begin." Over the next weeks, they worked together to build what they called the Avinis wells. The humans provided machines and sensors. The Dravari showed them where the earth still whispered with life. The first well took 10 days to dig, and when the drill broke through to a thin stream of cold water, The whole outpost gathered around it. The water was clear, pure, and cold. It flowed over the sand, darkening it like ink spreading on paper. Lyra stood beside Cole, her wings folding close as she smiled. "It remembers," she said softly. "The planet remembers." Children of both races, few but curious, played in the puddles that formed around the well. For the first time, laughter echoed across Aveni's. Claire tested the water again, confirming it was safe for both species. She looked at Cole, eyes shining. "We can live here," she said. "Not just survive." Cole nodded. "Then let's make this world worth living in." As days turned to weeks, green began to appear where the water touched. Small shoots of life pushed through the dry earth. The desert was still vast, still cruel, but it was changing. Slowly, stubbornly, beautifully. At night, Lyra would sit near the well and tell Aaron stories of their ancestors, of skies once blue and rivers that sang. Sometimes the humans listened too. They didn't always understand her words, but they understood the feeling. One evening, as the stars burned bright above, Cole walked to where Lyra Saturday, the first spring of Aveni's, he said quietly. "You gave this to us." Lyra looked at the flowing water. "No," she said. "We gave it to each other." Cole nodded. He looked out at the dark dunes, where the wind whispered like a song. "Maybe one day," he said, "Earth will see what we've done here." Lyra smiled faintly. "Then maybe one day, they will come not to take, but to learn." The two sat in silence, watching the water glimmer under the starlight. The desert that had once been only death now carried a heartbeat again. It was weak, but it was real. And in that quiet night, the world of Aveni's began to live once more. Years passed on Aveni's. The winds still blew across the endless dunes, but they no longer carried only dust. Patches of green had begun to spread where the wells had been built. Streams of clear water flowed through metal pipes and old riverbeds, bringing life to places that had been dry for centuries. Horizon 9 was no longer an outpost. It had become a home. Humans and Dravari lived together now. They worked, built, and learned side by side. The old rules of Earth Command had faded like old memories. No one saluted ranks anymore. They shared what they had and grew what they could. Children of both races played under the growing shade of small desert trees, laughing as if they had never known the sound of war. Commander Ethan Cole, older now and with streaks of gray in his hair, walked the paths around the wells every morning. He no longer wore his uniform. The badge he had once polished every day sat in a drawer, covered in dust. He had become something else, a keeper, not a commander. Lyra had grown too. Her wings were stronger, her eyes brighter. She helped lead the Water Guild, the group that maintained the wells. The humans respected her, and the Dravari followed her voice. She had become a bridge between two worlds. Aaron, no longer a child, was now one of the best engineers in the colony. He and Claire Mason worked together to design new filters that could pull moisture from the air. They called them sky nets. Soon, the people of Aveni's were no longer bound by the limits of what they once had. They were creating something new. One evening, as the sun set in bands of orange and gold, Cole stood by the largest well. The air smelled of water and earth. Lyra joined him, her gaze on the horizon. "Do you ever miss your old world?" she asked. Cole smiled faintly. "Sometimes, but I think this one needed me more." Lyra nodded. "Aveni's remembers those who care for it." She looked up at the stars beginning to appear. "We used to think they were gods. My people believed they watched us from above." Cole followed her gaze. "Maybe they just wait for us to learn." Silence filled the air. The soft sound of water flowing below them was steady and calm. "Do you think Earth will ever return?" she asked quietly. "Maybe," Cole said. "But when they do, they'll find something different. Not soldiers or conquerors, just people who learn to live." Lyra smiled. "Then they will see what we have seen, that life is not about taking but sharing." Night fell, and the stars brightened, reflecting in the water. The colony lights shimmered like fireflies across the sand. Children laughed somewhere in the distance, and the hum of machines blended with the sound of wind and waves. Hart, his hair now white, sat by the mess hall, telling stories to the young ones about the night the sky burned and how a girl from the desert changed everything. They listened with wide eyes, though to them it was history, not memory. Claire, older but still full of energy, kept her lab running. She often joked that Avini's had made her heart younger even as her hands grew slower. Aaron helped her every day, and sometimes they would stay up late, talking about ways to bring rain to the northern valleys. And Lyra, she still carried the cracked vial. It sat on her desk beside a small crystal stone her brother had given her when they were children. She never refilled the vial, never cleaned it. It was a reminder of what had begun everything. A single bottle of water and the choice to trade herself for hope. On the 10th anniversary of the first well, the people gathered in the central square. Cole stood before them, his voice steady and warm. Once, this place was nothing but dust and thirst, he said. But we learned that the greatest resource isn't water or power. It's compassion. The crowd listened in silence as he looked around at the faces, human and Dravari, young and old. We did not save Avini's by fighting, he continued. We saved it by understanding that no one survives alone. Lyra stepped forward and poured a small drop of water from the ancient vial into the new fountain that stood in the middle of the square. The water rippled and caught the light from the stars. For the ones who came before, she said softly, and for those who will come after. The crowd bowed their heads. The wind moved gently through the air, carrying with it the scent of wet earth and life. As the stars shimmered above, Cole looked at Lyra and whispered, "You cried for water once." She smiled, eyes shining. And now the world answers. That night, as the people of Avini's celebrated, the desert glowed with life. The wells hummed softly, and the stars above burned bright like silent witnesses. The legacy of the desert and the stars had begun, not as a story of conquest, but of compassion and rebirth. Avini's lived again, and this time it belonged to everyone.